This is the Master Brewers Podcast, brought to you by the Master Brewers Association of the Americas, a volunteer organization dedicated to continually improving the products and processes of our membership since 1887.
Let's go!
Master Brewers brings you interviews with the industry's best and brightest in brewing science, technology, and operations.
Calm down, I'm moving too fast.
This Master Brewers podcast is proudly sponsored by Hopsteiner, a global leader in the hop industry focused on quality, sustainability, and innovation in new hop varieties and hop products. Contact our brewery sales team to provide you with the hop-related tools you need to craft your next great beer. For more information, visit hopsteiner.com.
Additional support provided by
Draft Lab knows that quality and consistency are your brewery's top priorities. Draft Lab provides easy-to-use sensory analysis tools designed to bring your tasting data into action. To start your free 2-week trial today, visit draftlab.com. That's DRAUGHT lab.com.
And I told the RSM, okay, we want to have a lot of black currant, and we want to have a basically fast fermentation. We want to have a lot of the honey flavor, and we want to have as much esters in there as we can.
This week on the show, Max Michael talks about how he used RSM to optimize a non-Saccharomyces strain. This episode originally aired in May of 2017. We'll be back next week with a brand new episode that you won't want to miss. For listeners out there who think the Germans are only interested in lager and wheat beer yeast, we're going to change your mind. Max, give us a little background on Torulaspora delbrueckii and why you decided to study it.
Well, John, Torulaspora delbrueckii has been studied by quite some researchers for all different kinds of stuff. So it's been investigated for beer making and mixed fermentations. It's been investigated for baking bread, because it's a pretty good one for actually deep freezing dough with yeast in it and to revive it afterwards. And it's been also investigated for wine fermentations, as it adds a lot of very fruity flavors to the wine. So that was basically what we started out from. And there's a publication by Tatraides who started actually fermenting beer wort with Torulaspora delbrueckii, because he read something from his article. He had read something in Wikipedia about this strain being used in German wheat beer, which after really looking deep into literature, I haven't found any real proof of it, and he didn't either. But that was basically the pitch for this yeast strain to being used.
There's a lot of recent interest, as we all know, in unconventional or wild yeasts, and these strains haven't experienced the decades of domestication that our Saccharomyces friends have. Therefore, it's not really enough to just find a strain that produces desirable flavors. Max, what are some of the yeast characteristics that require practical consideration before using a wild yeast strain commercially?
Well, it really depends on the way you want to use it. So basically, what I decided to was to screen for yeast that will completely ferment the wort, basically like Saccharomyces cerevisiae or Pasteurianus do. So the main part for me was first to investigate if these yeasts will ferment all the sugars. Basically, that Saccharomyces will ferment, so mainly glucose, fructose, sucrose, and then of course maltose and maltotriose. That was basically the first part, and then there is some literature about yeast and hop interaction, and we really don't know yet if all yeast strains are really capable of growing or fermenting in the tendency of hops. So that was the next point I was looking at, if the yeast will actually perform in the tendency of hop alpha and iso alpha acids. And then the last part for me was to see how much alcohol they can actually produce from sugar, or basically I did it the other way around. I added ethanol and I looked what's the maximum amount of ethanol that these yeasts will grow in, so I can basically determine the amount of ethanol they can produce. And therefore, for me now, was about 5%, as I wanted to basically ferment the usual alcohol containing beer.
Okay, and you also looked at kind of the propagation as well as the oxygen demand and that sort of thing too, right?
Yes, that was basically the second part after looking for all those different strains. When I found the one that was actually capable of doing all the stuff I just mentioned, I looked at deeper into the actual production of beer with it, and there was then of course first the ability to propagate enough yeast, because what I found out in the beginning was that the cells of Torulaspora delbrueckii are so tiny that you gotta produce a lot of biomass to actually be able to ferment in kind of the same way as Saccharomyces yeast do.
Just for listeners, how tiny in comparison to a normal Saccharomyces yeast?
So the diameter is 3 times as small. So the total surface of the yeast is, of course, much smaller, and therefore not as much nutrition can be taken up, and of course not as much alcohol can be produced from basically the same cell amount. So that's something brewers do. They really look at, okay, I'll pitch with 5 million cells per milliliter, but the actual biomass that is being pitched differs from cell size. So
Sure.
That's basically what I looked at, and I wanted to try to get the biomass right so I can actually speed up the fermentation a little, because otherwise it would take forever to ferment a usual beer wort.
The goal of your study was to find the optimum combination of fermentation variables for Torulaspora delbrueckii, and to accomplish this, you used something known as response surface methodology. Why don't you tell us a little bit about RSM and why you wanted to use that?
Okay, so RSM is a pretty cool tool. It really cuts down on the trials you got to do, because if you have such a big variety as I did in my trials, it would have taken forever to combine all of the different factors. And what this program does, it gives you some main trials that you got to do for a certain time, and then the results you get out of them, you can really much compare them against each other, and it helps you with a lot of math behind it to be able to predict certain things that will work, and it tells you the significance levels of it, and from that basically you don't have to do as many trials as you would have to do without it. So it's basically cuts down on the trials and gives you a lot of information with a lot of less trials you got to do.
Prior to the RSM optimization, you mentioned briefly, you kind of pre-screened about 10 different strains, and then you ended up on this one that we're kind of referring to as T9 here. What exactly were you looking for during that pre-screening process, and how much variation did you find between those 10 or so different versions?
That was basically my first publication, screening for new brewing yeast in the non-Sac sector with Torulaspora delbrueckii as a model. So I screened a lot more than just those 10 Torulaspora delbrueckii strains, but those were the first 10 I actually wanted to validate my screening with. So as I said, I tried to get into the sugar utilization of these strains, and I looked at all different kinds at that time, which I cut down now to the main sugars and wort. But yeah, the sugar utilization was the main point at first, and I saw that there was a pretty big variance in there, and that I had actually one strain out of these 10 that would ferment maltose and maltotriose, which was pretty cool. But I cannot say it's fermentation. It's more utilization, because it wasn't it was still at usual oxygen level. So what I did after looking at the sugar utilization, I actually fermented wort with the different yeast strains, and I looked at the outcome. I looked at the sugars left in the fermented beverage, and that way I could also validate basically my screening from before and actually see that one strain, the T9, was capable of fermenting maltose and maltotriose. What I also looked at was, as I mentioned, the hop resistance. So I added iso-alpha extract to see if the yeast would grow or if there would be any influence. Then I looked at ethanol resistancy in between 1 and 10% basically of ethanol to see if it would grow. And I also did a phenolic off flavor test, because I didn't want to, produce just another wheat beer that tastes like cloth. So that was one of the tests I wanted to actually see if any of these strains would produce any phenolic off flavor, even though the phenolic off flavor is basically a wrong name for it, because it's not really an off flavor. It's really liked in some beers.
Coming up.
It was pretty cool that it actually turned out that the cooler we fermented, the more honey we had, the more we went up to about 22 degrees. We got a real strong blackcurrant-like flavor.
I'm John Bryce, and you're listening to the Master Brewers Podcast from the Master Brewers Association of the Americas.
This Master Brewers Podcast is proudly sponsored by Barna Mechanical, a full-service design build firm specializing in turnkey process and utility systems for the brewing industry. We partner with some of the best craft brewers in the U.S. to ensure the great beer they brew is what their customers get in every glass, bottle, can, or keg. You know beer. We know breweries.
Additional support provided by
ABS Commercial is a full-service brewery and parts outfitter. From our Raleigh headquarters to our Denver office, we proudly offer brew houses and fermenters from 3 barrels and up, yeast brinks, boilers, kegs, chillers, tri-clamp, and other stainless parts, all with the quickest delivery and lead times in the industry. Learn more at abs-commercial.com or call 877-BREW-ABS. ABS Commercial. We are brewers.
Here's what's coming up on the Master Brewers calendar. The District Northwest Fall Meeting is in Yakima October 12th and 13th. The District Michigan Quarterly Technical Meeting is October 18th at Coonan Brewing in Clinton Township. District St. Louis meets at Charlottesville Brewery October 18th. Don't miss the Canned Seaming Webinar October 19th. The District Philly Technical Weekend is October 19th and 20th. District Southeast Fall Meeting and Technical Session is also happening the 19th and 20th at Tank Brewing in Miami. The Master Brewers 2-week Brewing and Malting Science course begins in Madison October 21st. District Rocky Mountain meets at Miller Coors in Golden, Colorado October 25th. There's plenty of other meetings in November as well, so be sure to check out the full calendar of events at MBAA.com for more details or to find a district meeting near you. Now back to the show. So you did all this pre-screening. So you looked at alcohol tolerance and resistance to hops compounds. Then you optimized for propagation. You looked at oxygen demand, all these different things, and you end up with this one strain, T9, that you wanted to then use RSM to optimize the fermentation temperature and pitch rate. So could you give us a rough idea of kind of the ranges we're talking about here for the temperature and pitch rate that you were evaluating in this optimization?
Yeah, so in some pre-tests, I wanted to actually, get the range a little bit further than what I used in the actual publication now. But what we saw pretty fast was that temperatures below 15 degrees Celsius, there was a real slow fermentation, and even a real big raise in pitching rate wouldn't, show the results we wanted to have. And so that was basically where we decided, okay, we'll start from 18, 16 degrees and go up. And then we also saw that all the beers that we produced in before, below higher than 25 degrees fermentation temperature, they all basically tasted the same, really winey and dry. And so that was where we decided, okay, we go in between 15 and 25 degrees Celsius. And the pitching rate, we started from 1 million and we went up to 70 million because we thought, okay, 30 million is the maximum that is being used for bottom fermenting beer. So we kind of basically said, okay, we're just going to double that and then see what happens. And we saw that even going further and further in pitching rate would help us a lot with increasing the fermentation speed. But of course, there was always the point where we had to, get a point where we could see how much biomass can we produce to actually start the fermentation in the usual propagation, and then how fast our fermentation will go. So that's when we decided, okay, we'll go with 50 million to 120 million pitching rate to vary that in between those variables to see how that works. That's all we saw from what we saw from pre-tests we did, and worked out pretty well.
Let's talk about sensory analysis a little bit. Things can shift to subjective once we get into sensory. It sounds like you guys did all the right things in regards to setting up your sensory analysis. But why don't you tell us a little bit about the types of flavors that were being produced by this yeast strain and how you guys decided what optimal really was in regards to the various flavor compounds and their intensities?
So when I started first with those non-Sacs, with actually screening those yeast, the T9 was outstanding in the first trials. What all the people said, what they tasted from just the usual wort fermentation at 27 degrees, as I did before. And so that was when I actually wanted to know what kind of flavors the panelists taste from the different beers. That's when I started to collect all the different attributes they would say. And so when I gave them a beer fermented with T9 in the beginning, a lot of them were like, oh, it's wine-like, it's a lot like blackcurrant, and it's a little bit like honey. So, and basically, from all those different things I got from my panelists, I put together a list. And in the end, when I decided to optimize T9, I said, okay, we're going to go with those main flavors that we saw, so honey-like, wine-like, and blackcurrant-like. And that was what I basically just gave my panelists to grade it. So the less, in the tasting they have to grade, the better results I think we'll get. And so that was why we choose those characteristics. And it was pretty cool that it actually turned out that the cooler we fermented, the more honey we had, and the more we went up to about 22 degrees, we got a real strong blackcurrant-like flavor, but not like a blackcurrant juice, but more really fruity berry-like flavor. And then what we experienced before was that when we raised the fermentation temperature, we got really this wine-like dry flavor, which we didn't like that much in the beer. So I put in all those responses in the RSM, and I told the RSM, okay, we want to have a lot of blackcurrant, and we want to have a basically fast fermentation. We want to have a lot of the honey flavor, and we want to have as much esters in there as we can. and the RSM basically gave me the optimum combination that I then used in my scaled up fermentation to actually produce the beer and retry it basically, or give it to my panelists again and see how they liked it. And that was how we basically chose the optimal combination of those two factors, pitching rate and temperature.
Obviously, the point of the study was not just to optimize Torulaspora delbrueckii, but also to evaluate just the potential of RSM as applied to any yeast strain. Max, what other yeast do you have on deck for RSM optimization, and should we expect Weihenstephan to become sort of a major source of innovative wild yeast for commercial breweries in the near future?
That would be awesome. But I think German brewers, they're still warming up to the point where they actually want to use wild yeast. But I screened so far, I screened about 400 more strains from about 25 different species. And I found about 20 of them maybe that I can use for optimization. And there are some that will come out shortly that you can read about that do crazy flavors and also behave very crazy in fermentations. But I can't talk too much about it because it's being reviewed right now, and I hope it'll be out there soon.
That was Max Michel here on the Master Brewers podcast. Be sure to check out his peer-reviewed paper in the Master Brewers Technical Quarterly. You can get there from the Publications tab or by typing non-conventional yeast into the industry's best search bar at MBAA.com. 130 years ago, Master Brewers was built on the concept of brewers helping each other out so we could all make the best possible beer. That's still true to this day, and it's where a lot of the camaraderie in this industry originated. Master Brewers' award-winning Ask the Brewmasters is the best place to go for troubleshooting, where you'll find the industry's only discussion forum that's moderated for technical accuracy by a team of experts. See what everyone else is talking about at community.mbaa.com. Did you enjoy today's episode? Would you like us to keep making more? If so, there's a really simple way you can let us know. Subscribe, rate, and review the Master Brewers podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts.
My heart full of rage. Well, I can't get stuck, I can't be losing too much, and then I'm heading out to any other place. My fist full of courage. My heart full of rage. Well, I can't get stuck, I can't be losing too much.